Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Austin Tech Connect. This is the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. My name is Thom Singer, and I have now been with the Austin Technology Council for 3 years. And I was hired to kind of reinvent it. We've been doing a lot of stuff for the last 3 years. We are ready to do some pretty cool stuff starting in June of this year and looking forward to the next decade. So now is the time. We need your help. If you work in tech, if you run a company, we need your support. Financially, yes, but beyond that, we need your support of showing up, of volunteering, and most importantly, we need your ideas because I can't do this alone. I'm really not that smart, and it's not the Thom Show. This is a grassroots organization, and now is the time in 2025 that I am inviting the grassroots of Austin Tech back into the Austin Technology Council to take us to the future. Anyway, this podcast is one way that we reach out to the community, and every single week, I bring to you interviews with people who are really cool, who are shaking things up, who do things in Austin, and who care deeply about our city. And today, we're joined by my friend, Jason Parrish. Jason, welcome to the show.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. For those of you who don't know Jason Parrish, he is the co-founder of Altus Nova, but he is so much more than that. He helps people design their software products, but he has a really eclectic history, so he has a great way of looking at the whole world. He was born in Australia. He was raised in Europe, a bunch of different schools, like 7 different countries, came to the United States in 1986, went to UT in 1989, and that's actually almost about the time I met him. I actually moved to Austin in 1991, and full disclosure, I ran a photo studio called Phototech that did all of the pictures for the fraternities and the sororities and the other clubs on campus. And Jason worked for the t-shirt company that was in the same building owned by the same person. So we actually had offices down the hall from each other. So I knew young, like 20-year-old Jason. But one of the things is even though he was selling t-shirts and going to school, he was absolutely obsessed and mesmerized by technology. And so in 1992, he started his first startup and dropped out of UT. That first startup didn't make it. Like so many startups, it didn't go anywhere. So he went back to school. A couple of years later, he realized that going to class and he had to go into technology. So then in 1994, he started Smart Technologies. And that was the start of a wonderful life for Jason that went forward. He is now, like I said, working with Altus Nova. He is just a really great guy thinking about the way technology is, the way Austin is. And he's the father of 3, soon to be the father of 4. Jason, I am so glad you're here on the show. I gave a lot in that introduction, but let's go in that Wayback Machine. Let's not go back to Australia and birth, but let's go to sort of starting that first company and being mesmerized by tech. What was it like around 1991, 1992 for you, and how did you get your career going?
Well, back then it was Prodigy. AOL was the cool kids. I could type fast. Telenet was around, green screen, Gopher, and it was a lot of fun. It was the very beginning of being able to make a machine do things for you from a consumer perspective. So I had my Mac SE, and we called it File Breaker, but it was called File Maker. And you could make a form-based self-service thing. You could auto-generate something. It was a lot of fun. The first idea was trying to merge the old way of buying technology, which was fax communications based, with tech. So creating, and people might forget, but back in those days, Compaq had a sticker on it that said 98% IBM compatible. So you couldn't buy, if you were a corporation, you couldn't buy 500 Compaq machines and then 500 copies of WordStar, and then buy 100 Tektronix printers and assume that it would all work. You had to actually get a sample of each product, plug it all together, upload your custom program, and make sure that that ecosystem of gadgetry all actually worked. So there was a whole world back then of labs where every big company had a lab, and you brought together the components of what you had to buy, you validated it, and then you went and bought your big order. And so
I just have to jump in, and I laugh. 98% compatible. I mean, that was pretty dang compatible for 1990.
And that was a sticker on every computer that wasn't an IBM computer.
It just made me laugh. It's like 98 IBM compatible, 98%.
People forget that first back in those days, like in the 80s, a fax machine could only talk to itself. So you had to have a fax room of different fax machines of different brands because you had to know what brand your customer was working on.
Oh, that's true. That's true. That's interesting.
Anyway, there's so many things that people forget. But that idea, it actually took off. So we had a very, very aggressive takeoff. We went to 40 employees and $1 million revenue our first year. It's just an equally fast nosedive.
Yeah, but that's the story of so many of our tech entrepreneur friends, right? There's a couple of starts before you really get going. So what was it like? What was it like being a student and dropping out and being a student again, while at the same time starting tech? I mean, I know that Dr. Kozmetsky and Laura Kilcrease at the university and at the incubator and IC Squared were really instrumental in helping you. What was it like back then?
The moment where I gave up on UT Plan 2 was a funny moment because my professor corrected me in class, and I was confused why he was correcting me. And then after class, I told him what I said again. He said, "Jason, that happened years ago." I said, No, it happened last night. And he said, "Well, how would you know that?" And I said, "Well, the AP wire." He goes, What does that mean?" I said, "Well, I read the AP wire every night before I come to class." And he's like, "Well, show me. What does that mean?" And so, my teacher, who in public had corrected me and told me I was wrong, then apologized and said, "Show me how to read the AP wire before class. And by the way, could you help me connect a camera to talk to my daughter in France?" So I learned from the 92 company, it wasn't a failure to launch. It was the opposite. I made very bad decisions about my investors. I had no discipline around growth. We grew too fast with no structure, and it failed. But the lessons learned from that, most importantly, is the type of investors you bring in is a critical decision. And so with that scar tissue, I was able to go talk, very fortunately, to Kozmetsky. I'd spent a long time trying to get his attention, and I had a brother who was very respected in the educational system of UT, and he had recently received, I think, the Mortar Board is the name of the honor. And so that was my excuse. It's Michael's little brother. He must be as smart as Michael, which is not true. And that's how I got my way to Dr. Kozmetsky. And Dr. Kozmetsky led to Laura Kilcrease. Laura Kilcrease was wonderful and introduced me to Dr. Heller. And it just propagated from there. Dr. Heller introduced me to Kay Matthews and Carmelo Gordian and Bill Wood. And so the story, the fairy tale unfolded. But it really did begin with Kozmetsky questioning why I was still in college. And he didn't often meet undergrads. And so I was very fortunate to get his attention.
Yeah, that's one part of your story that I find very interesting, because he kind of had, from what I understand, kind of a rule. He worked with graduate students because he really didn't have time for everybody. And so you were one of those few who got through that barrier. And it is interesting when you talk about, and I love this part of your story, Dr. Kozmetsky introduced you to Laura. Laura Kilcrease introduced you to Dr. Heller. Dr. Heller then introduces you on, it goes on then to Kay Matthews and Carmelo. I mean, if you really think back to that era, if you had Ernst & Young and Brobeck and Austin Ventures behind you, that was a trifecta. So if you had Kay Matthews and Carmelo and Bill Wood all talking to you, that was a good start for Smart Technologies.
And I don't come from this pedigree. So to be super clear, I didn't know what that meant. So I didn't know, I never heard of Ernst & Young or Brobeck, Plager Harrison, or Austin Ventures. In fact, the first time I ever interacted with Mr. Wood, he had called introducing himself and said, "Why haven't you contacted Austin Ventures about your idea? I've heard about you now through a couple people." And I was confused. And I said, "Well, but why would you invest in me? I'm nothing. I'm an idea." Like, I didn't understand that was their business. And so I'll never forget, Ross Garber and Neil Weber were sent to come inspect us. And And so they pulled up, I think it was Ross, in a beautiful 911 out, and I was driving a 1986 stick shift F-250 with no air conditioning, and I was just mesmerized by these just amazing, like the types of people that I was meeting. And it continued. I'll never forget the first time driving to Carmelo Gordian's Christmas party. I was just so blown. I was so out of my element. And I was raised to be a good student. I was raised to be an Eagle Scout. I was raised to maybe go to the military. I was not raised in this world.
So it's interesting, just full disclosure. So not at that era, but at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s, for 5.5 years, I was the marketing director for Brobeck, Flager, and Harrison, and then Andrews Kurth. So I worked for and with Carmelo for a long time. And even before I worked for him, I was invited to some of those Christmas parties at his house. And then we sort of turned that into patio parties at Brobeck. He and I sort of developed this idea of putting the parties quarterly out on the back patio at the law firm overlooking the lake. And so you're reminding me of a lot of my history, because Carmelo was very instrumental in my career as well, in a different way. But they were some of the best parties you ever could have gone to in the 90s and early 2000s.
I will say, I think a takeaway from that you're making me think about is I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I made a list. So for me, coming to Austin and discovering that Richard Garriott lived here, and I had grown up on Ultima, to me, that's, I think, what most people think of as like meeting an NFL football player maybe, or meeting a celebrity. So to me, the celebrities were all, I was confused that Dr. Andrew Heller, the inventor of the R6000, HAL Systems, first firewall, first 64-bit workstation, that he was this guy in Lakeway you could go talk to. Mr. Bill Hayden, the founder of CompuWeb. At one time, one of the top 10 richest men in Texas was, I made a list. I was confused of all of the amazing talent here. Schlumberger Worldwide R&D Center. And so I went door to door, like I was selling Cutco knives, to every single one of these people. And every single one of them, other than Michael Dell, who understandably was busy, literally took the time and sat down and got to know us. And it was a blessing. Mr. Trybig, Dr. Heller, Bill Hayden. Amazing time. It was an amazing time. Even Bob Fabio took the time to come and just lecture me about how to manage a sales team and a sales funnel. It was really, and so I guess the message is to those young entrepreneurs, those people that have wisdom are available and surprisingly are happy to help so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of the names, not all of them, but someday all of them, all the names that you mentioned, half those names we've talked about are already inducted into the Austin Tech Hall of Fame. And one of the reasons that the Austin Technology Council and myself started the Austin Tech Hall of Fame is we need to remember how Austin started and how it began to become this amazing tech hub. And just listening to you rattle off these names as people who touched your life individually, it's a lesson for everyone in Austin, whether they were here in the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, or whether they just got here in the 2020s, that Austin is a special place where those people and their successors are there to help grow the next generation.
And it wasn't just the founders, right? When you think about, yes, there were the great men like Mr. Maple Sr. or Eric Jones, but there were also that first level of VPs who built these brands like Ron Wolf at National Instruments. Like all of these people were here, and it was really an amazing time. So I have very fond memories of creating and starting, and I feel very fortunate to have been both prepared, but also tremendously lucky to be at the right place and right time.
So Smart Technologies was one of those companies that at the time was one of the Austin hot companies going on in town. Correct me if I'm wrong, but was it an Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year finalist, winner?
No, that was my next startup.
Okay. All right. So let's get to the next.
But Smart did win the KPMG Best Software Product Company under 100 employees. And it won other accolades. And in the end, Goldman Sachs got involved. by the way, that's also where I met my current partner. So Prue Agrawal was a young consultant working for BSG, which is another Austin company,
Yep.
Steve Papermaster,
Steve
another
Papermaster,
legend. Yeah. And Motorola, I was able to convince them to take a risk on me, and they hired BSG in Chicago, and Eric Durst, who was the boss at the time, introduced me to Prue Agrawal, and flash forward 26 years, here we are working together as co-founders of Altus Nova the last 8 years.
Nice. So what was next after Smart?
So Smart was an early generation software company. I had two co-founders, Jeff DeCoe and Mark Benson. Mark Benson has since passed. And that company, after we sold it, we actually split it in half. So the data center aspect of the company we sold to IXC Communications, which became Level 3. And the software side of the business we sold 2 years later to I2, which, I don't use the word exit as an adjective. We sold the business for $94.5 million in 1999, and it was a really neat experience, not only to make money for your investors, but I feel like the first 50-ish employees walked away with a life-changing amount of money.
Nice.
Jump forward. So an engineer that had worked for me at Smart introduced me to his roommate at UT, and that was the birth of Curion. And then the CMO of Smart joined as the third co-founder, and we launched Curion, which was also cutting edge of its time, but it was one of the first generations of syndicated dynamic content. So up until then, you might have content from one system to another system automated, but it would be static. It would be the temperature or price of a stock, but it didn't update. When that price changed at the source system, you weren't able to syndicate a dynamic piece of content. And so the patents around Curion were seminal in that evolution.
Nice.
That company is the one you thought of that was nominated for finalist. And
sure.
What happened there was we sold our 18-month birthday for a significant multiple. Another great lesson, we sold all stock to a private company. Wilson Sonsini was the law firm. Paul Tobias, who was another legend that should be on your checklist of people.
Yep.
And if not for Paul Tobias and Wilson Sonsini's excellent work, the acquiring company was not forthright in the disclosures in the acquisition. And so not even a year later, their parent investor just turned the lights off. So what was a celebrated success, 7x return, 18 months, everybody high-fiving. John Thornton was the lead investor on that deal, whereas Bill Wood was the lead investor on Smart. That went from a celebration to true, utter failure. Not failure, but zero. So an amazing lesson learned there where we thought we had a huge success, and while we were still tied up in the earnout, it literally went to zero.
Again, there's a lot of those stories as well in Austin. With all of our successes in Austin, we have a lot of stories that people need to know to learn those lessons from. So,
it was a great lesson, and it's a great lesson on having the right lawyers at the right time personally saved me and the people around me, because we did do our best. We were not the party that wasn't forthright.
Sure.
So
let's fast forward to today and what you're doing with Altus Nova. Tell us about that company and what are some of the great things you're doing.
So Altus Nova has been a lot of fun. I think of Altus Nova as, and I'm being a little humorous, but it's people's last job. So Prue and I created Altus Nova in 2018. Most of the people that work in Altus Nova have worked for one of us in the past for some significant period of time. Most people we have a 10-plus year relationship with. We are a software product strategy design development firm. So if you were looking for a software development company, there's a million options. The only thing worse than building software that's off schedule and off budget is building the wrong software on schedule and on budget. And so, Altus Nova really is a company of product strategists, technical business strategists, process engineers, product managers, and also very, very talented development teams. But really the goal of Altus Nova is to help think through what is the root cause of the problem trying to be solved, what are more than 2-3 ways to solve it, and helping our customers think through those different scenarios and optimizing for the scenario that makes the most sense for them in the context of their business. I think we do a great job of not talking tech and instead living in the business strategy and execution and understanding how they are talking and thinking and helping them understand the consequences of action or inaction technically and how it directly affects one of their KPIs. And so we spend a lot of time in that world helping them understand that having a product strategy is great, and especially with the heavy influx of private equity in this space, the business strategy and financial models are pretty tight. There often is a lacking technical product strategy that will actually marry the business strategy such that it can be executed on the timeline that they have to then sell the company in the near future. So that's where we've stepped in. Small team, under 60 people, vertically very focused. We have exceptional case studies and references in the areas of intelligent infrastructure, logistics, health tech, insurtech, e-commerce, those areas. Where fintech really is across all of them, because if you truly are implementing a novel business strategy to pivot a business, you probably should look at how if you're going to re-examine how you do what you do, which is thus the pivot, you probably should re-examine how you pay for what you do and how you get paid for what you do. So fintech is a horizontal aspect always in these projects.
And so I hadn't thought of that, and that's actually a very interesting point that makes a lot of sense to me. One of my favorite things along the line of just everything you've been saying is behind you, your background. This is mostly audio. I don't know if we'll have any little video clips, so nobody will see this. But behind you on your background, it says Altus Nova turns customer software into your competitive advantage. And I'm reading that and thinking that makes total sense to me, because at the end of the day, if you do that type of product correctly, if you do that software correctly, that is your advantage. So why do you say, hey, if we do this right, it's your competitive advantage? Why do you say that?
So I think oftentimes there's a business strategy. There's whether it's based on customer input, whether it's based on a genius, discontinuous innovation that's been discovered, and the private equity guys get involved. So now you have the money to execute this strategy, and the consequences are massive. It's 2, 3, 4x growth over a handful at most years. And oftentimes it's hard to find a extremely talented tech team that isn't lost myopically in the details of the tech. And so what we are doing is bringing a team where you have very senior technical product management, very senior front-end and back-end architects, very senior business analysts. And so we're able to dissect that business strategy and correlate it to very discrete technical capabilities such that we can then create a real roadmap over the next 6 to 18 months to build the technical platform that will sustain this business strategy pivot or innovation. And in doing that, build as little. So I think of what we do more as poetry than writing a book. We writing as little custom software as needed to, in the proper order of events, create the functionality that supports the milestones of the business to execute on plan, on budget.
Nice.
And to do so flawlessly.
So what's the future of the company? Where do you've come a long way over 8 years. Where do you go from here?
It's been, I probably shouldn't admit this out loud. I feel sometimes that I think lots of people work hard at climbing the ladder of success. I feel sometimes that I've fallen down the staircase of success. So where we find ourselves today is wonderful, which is we're very deep in our industries. Our customers don't teach us the industry. They're explaining what makes them unique. We have a track record of on time, on budget, high quality delivery. We've always been word of mouth only, so we don't have a sales force. The last 2 years, we have started to build out some biz dev communications with private equity players, some marketing communications with LinkedIn and such, and things like this conversation. I feel very fortunate across the board in each industry. We have multiple case studies of business impact, and across the board, CEO, CFO, CTO, and Chief Product Officer, CPO, have really embraced us and are highly referenceable and will take a phone call for us. And so, if I step back and look at the business, people want to pay their bills on time. They want to move forward. They want to work with us. Where today 100% is repeat business. I'm working right now on the first new customer in over almost a year. And then interestingly, not by intent, all but one of our projects has an active private equity presence. And so I think it's been really interesting. The industries of knowledge we have are there. We're growing the business at a rate much more than we're growing the team. So the way we've incorporated AI, which I think and again, Altus Nova, lots of software dev companies have a handful of great resources, quote, superstars, and then staffed with a team of normal developers. We have an anti-hero policy at Altus Nova, so I don't have any superstars. I just have very high-quality senior resources. So I don't have a junior team. I don't have a cheaper team. I have a great team. And so we've been able, with AI, to double capacity with minimal change in our team structure. So I think where we're going, we're year over year, 23, 24, 25 have been record years. I think 26 is on plan also. We've never thought about selling the business because we love what we do. It's fun. I love working with good people on good ideas, with good investors, with a common goal of mutual benefit. But who knows?
So it's interesting because having known you since you were like 19 years old, you seem very much at peace with who you are and where you are in your career and your company compared to, the guy at 19 who was doing a million things at once trying to take over the world. Is that a fair statement? Is Jason at peace?
I don't think I'm at peace. I think I'm more centered and present. I think I understand. I have high self-awareness, and I think I've quit swimming against the current. So the Jason you're thinking of didn't care what it took, how much pain, how much suffering. Uh, my psychology then was, don't fight someone who's willing to inflict more pain upon themselves than you're willing to suffer. And so I didn't lose ever. But it was not a healthy way to live. Mm-hmm. I think parenthood teaches you boundaries and limits. I'm fortunate to have 3 wonderful grown kids. And so, yeah, I also think, when you think about dealing with people, what is the worst case scenario of failure? So at 19, the worst case was go back offshore onto a rig with my dad, or go to a mobile home in East Texas, or join the military. And I got hurt, so I couldn't do the job I wanted to do in the military. So I'd have to join the military in a job that wasn't what I wanted, because I was totally, completely geared towards the military, but I got injured on a ship. So yeah, when your backup plan across the board sucks, it highly motivates you to not need your backup plan. Mm-hmm.
So I want to shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about Austin.
Yeah.
So you've been here as long as I have. You got here a couple years before, but you're a student, so we'll call it a wash. I got here in 91. So much has changed about Austin and so many things. It's been a wild ride and a great ride. I always use the term, my wife and I say we grew up with the Austin business community because we got here at exactly the right time in history, I think, for a lot of reasons. And we've seen it go. So what do you love about Austin over the last 40 years, however long that is, doing the math, 35 years? And what do you love about that? And then where do you think Austin's going?
Yeah, I guess it's crazy to say it out loud, but it's been 36 years, hasn't it? Holy smokes. Yeah, 36 years since freshman orientation. Austin's been fascinating to watch. I mean, imagine when you got here, they just opened Southwest Parkway.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Southwest had just opened, and 360 was just a couple years old.
Yeah, the bridge was maybe 6 or 7 years old, going all the way through. I mean, I guess the road had been there for a long time, but it didn't go anywhere. But I can remember driving up 360, and there was nothing there. The occasional mansion and the occasional business building, but it wasn't what it is today.
There was not a red light. Back in those days, driving to Lake Travis was a solid hour drive with no traffic. Now it's an hour drive sitting still.
Because of traffic, yeah.
It was fascinating. Austin Lakeway was a sleepy retirement town. Austin was a state capital with politics and a university. You had Schlumberger's Worldwide R&D Center. You had IBM. It wasn't a tech town in the sense of software. It was a respected hardware place. Most of the IP spinning out of UT was hardware related. You had the rare software company like a Tivoli pioneering that world. You had people like Mike Frost at TechWorks, another E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year award winner. Actually, my very first ever customer was Mr. Frost in my first startup in 92. The first guy that ever said yes to me.
Such a nice guy.
A wonderful. I probably am remiss in not checking on him.
I just wrote down call Mike Frost because I haven't talked to him in a decade. But what a nice man.
Yeah. And so, back then Austin was not a tech place, right? It was truly musicians. It was a beautiful, we walked the streets of 6th Street. It was safe and fun, and Alan Hayes standing in a door playing amazing guitar, a hole in the wall. It was Little Sister and Patrice Pike, and there were so many. It was such a different place than it is now.
Liberty Lunch. I mean, when you think of the music scene, I mean, Austin will never be the same as it was with the Liberty Lunch days.
Maggie Mays. There's so many places that people don't realize. Steamboat that are gone. That you didn't have to be 21. You could go out in Austin. You could be young. You could go to a place, put on a wristband. The police were loving and friendly and just wanted you to be safe. And I can't tell you how many times a cop would walk up and say, "Boy, are you 21? No, sir. Then why are you holding a beer in your hand? Because, sir, pour the beer out and walk away, son. Yes, sir."
Yep.
And it was just a different world. And then it went through, it grew wildfire and good and bad. And, there was that, I got busy having children, so I sort of checked out of the scene of Austin other than the business scene. But I was surprised as my kids grew up and I went to show them things that I had done. They weren't there. It wasn't, you don't want to take your 17-year-old daughter down 6th Street and show her your memories.
No, probably not.
It's very sad. And so there was a period there where the types of people coming in, there's a period there in the 2000s. I used to buy employees' houses in California to get them to come to Austin. And then I had to sell them. And then I had to give a 1-year contract for them to move to Austin. So yes, things have changed dramatically. And I think the types of people who were coming, I remember it was 80% back then from California, but it was a different type of people. And so there was a period there where I was second guessing the path Austin was on. But I feel like these last 8 years, 7 years, just the people coming from Chicago, New York, California, the level of intellect and energy and passion. I've been happily super excited about the cadre of people I've engaged in the last, it's probably 5 to 8 years. Just a tremendous wave of new ideas and new energy. And though I don't do a lot of social things, when the marketing people do force me out to do things, I'm always just impressed by the 20-year-old entrepreneurs that I meet and the ideas they have and the communication style and intellect, and it's an exciting place to be. I think depending on your passion, Austin, Texas, and Nashville are just two amazing cities.
Yep.
That if you're in your 20s, why not live there?
Yep. So what do we have to watch out for? Where could Austin go astray? Anything?
I mean, I think maybe it's an Austin statement, but it's a bigger statement. There seems to be a disconnect between hard work, being compassionate, being a good citizen, being a steward of the air and the water and the land, managing growth, what to do about the homeless. There has to be respect of private property. And granted, Texas is a uniquely 97% private property state. And so people who come here from places like Colorado or Utah or California, where Colorado, I think, is the opposite. It's maybe 70% BLM. They just, it's hard for them to understand, but this is a private property state. And so if you have to respect private property, have to respect a contract, we have to solve the homeless issue. We can't dismiss crime as not being crime when it is crime. There's an anxiety in the air that makes me anxious for people. Ironically, I don't have anxiety, but when I'm dealing with my kids and their peer groups who are all in their 20s, there's just a level of anxiety in the air of discomfort and uncertainty. And I think a lot of that is just everyone looking for the edge case worst version of the story, and everyone focusing on the differences.
So as we wrap this up, any final words for people listening in Austin?
Yeah, I think, Thom, what you're doing at Austin Technology Council is wonderful. If you're trying to, whenever someone talks to me about coming to Austin, you're the first thing that I remind them that if you're trying to do tech and you don't participate in ATC, what are you thinking? Altus Nova isn't a company that's selling directly towards the Austin community, right? We're selling to companies that need us and where they are as a second conversation. So I think in closing, I'm excited for you. I'm excited for ATC. I'm excited for Austin. I really appreciate you're doing a wonderful job bringing this mix of old and young together, and it's the way you're curating the audience is wonderful. So I thank you for letting me do this conversation.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for being here. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and listened. I say it every show. If it wasn't for the audience, why would we do the podcast? So make sure if you're listening that you're sharing the podcast with your coworkers, your friends, anybody who touches Austin Tech, because Austin Tech Connect podcast is a great way to know who's out there, because you may not have known Jason Parrish before, but if you listen to us for the last 41 minutes, I think you're going, who is this guy? I need to know who this guy is, because Jason, I think you have one of the most interesting ways of looking at the world of any of the people I know here in Austin. And I respect that. You've been very good to me over the last few years since we've reconnected. And I hope that everybody who tunes in will tune in every week, because every week we bring you someone just as cool as Jason Parrish. And I know you're thinking, Thom, how will you ever find anybody as cool again? But next week we sure as heck will. So make sure that you're tuning in. And please, we are trying now, after going through a couple of years of reorg, we are trying now to grow ATC. We need companies to step up. I need sponsorship. I need membership. If we don't have money, we can't do it. It can't be a one-man show. It's time for me to hire people. We have a lot of ideas, and there's some new programming we want to do. So I ask everybody in the community, give us what you can, show up when you can, and let's build this dang thing together. All right, we'll see you next week right here on Austin Tech Connect.